This is something special and I can't wait to share it with you. Today, I chat with Alex, a social six, about how she uses creativity as part of her healing and self-discovery process. Now, if you're new to this series, hi, I'm Samantha Mackay, Enneagram coach certified through the Chestnut Paes Academy, and I'm fascinated about what creativity looks like for the 27 subtypes of the Enneagram. Now, it isn't easy for sixes to participate in this series, so I was so pleased when Alex took the leap with me, but it wasn't without fear. And we talk about how fear showed up in this process. And I think it's really beautiful to see how that played out. And Alex articulates that so clearly. Now, fear wasn't always as clear to Alex as it is now. And for a few years, she thought she was a self-preservation one, but she's known she's a social six for about a year. And one thing she reflected on was that once she knew she was a six and reviewed things she'd written over the years, Alex was really surprised to see how often she mentioned fear. It's not something that she'd resonated with as a concept cognitively beforehand, but on reflection, it was all over the place, even in her writing. Now, we don't dive into the ins and outs of the social six here. If you'd like to learn more about that, I've included some links below. And if you'd like to read more of Alex's writing, definitely take a look at her website, Wiki Beyond the Flames. Again, the link is below. Enjoy. What does creativity mean to you?
When you asked that question, I wasn't quite sure if you wanted like a definition or if you wanted like a sentimental meaning. So I thought of both. In terms of the definition, I think that creativity means to me bringing original things into existence. That can be things, it can be ideas, it can be expressions, but it's original. Not that it's original to the world, because then nothing pretty much would be created, but original to your frame of reference. And then the second part of that definition, I would say, is building upon things that are already created or processes that are already there, building upon those in an original way. And again, that's your frame of reference. In terms of sentimental meaning, to me personally, I've seen that creativity just helps me have greater access to things that are helpful in life or positive. Things like basically thinking things through in my life. That's a big way I've used creativity in my life, just to process things, whether that be thinking about things, shifts that have happened in my life, or addressing things that I want to change going forward. Any sort of thinking things through or processing, and then having fun as well.
Mm. I appreciate you giving me multiple definitions, especially as a six who likes to have clarity, include definitions on things. And so, yeah, the definitive definition was bringing something new into the world in your frame of reference. And I really liked that added spin on it, that's your frame of reference, because you're right. In some way, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything
Right.
has been created, but by creating things ourselves, we continue to create things that add to the overall zeitgeist and culture that we're in that other people can build on. And so I
Yes.
think I was listening to this podcast yesterday, it put it really well, that creativity matters to all of us because it all adds up. Even
Yeah.
if the creativity that we make doesn't reach everyone, we don't get famous from it, we don't earn tons of it all, but it still all adds up in a way.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
I heard on a podcast too at one point just talking about that concept of like even things that you think, this is a really simple example, but like the creation of the wheel. Well, Tesla, not giving any value judgments there, Tesla wouldn't exist without the creation of the wheel. It's all building throughout the centuries, throughout generations. Everything's building on each other. So yeah,
mm.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so much so. So you mentioned what creativity means to you personally from a sentimental perspective, but what does it look like? What kind of creativity do you do either personally or professionally?
Yeah, in my view, I'm not very involved with creativity professionally. I think there are areas in which I am involved, but I'll start out with personal. In terms of personal relationship to creativity, I process a lot through writing or through poetry. I don't call myself a photographer by any standard, but I do love taking millions of pictures of one item from a bunch of different perspectives, or from one perspective, just moving a centimeter or whatever. Yeah, I like doing those kind of things. I recently wrote a short story for my best friend. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and I will never do long form writing again. But yeah, so I think personal life, it's mostly writing, sometimes for photography. I think even like joking and stuff like that has an aspect of creativity to it. In terms of my personal life, I do work with kids, but I don't work really in a strictly teaching role. My role is more of like a caregiver and stuff like that. So in terms of creativity, like I'll joke with the kids and be silly with the kids, might joke with coworkers or things like that. I found that when I do try to do things that are the stereotypical creativity, like drawing with the kids or whatever, basically what I do is a series of patterns, be that in colors or shapes, whatever. It's just a series of patterns and boom, there's the page. So, though recently I tried doing a collage and that was kind of cool. It was cool to just have the randomness to it. So, but anyway, those are my thoughts in terms of personal and professional life with creativity.
I can imagine, though, in your interaction with children in that professional space, that there would be an element of creativity, not even just those traditional elements of drawing and doing arts and crafts with the kids, but also
Mm,
just how do I support them in this moment
yes, that's
could be
true.
very
Yeah.
creative.
Yeah, completely. It's like applying things that emotional wellness is really important to me. And it's something I've worked on a lot in my life. And so applying things that I've learned or heard of in my life, applying it to the particular context, which in my kind of second definition of creativity, like having new applications to things that are already existent. So yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that meeting kids where they at has an aspect of creativity as well as they are their own person, it's its own situation and all that kind of stuff. There's a newness there.
Absolutely. So, what supports you to be creative?
In terms of practical things that I use in my creativity, I use my phone. When I take pictures, the photographer I am, I use my phone. And then also when I do write, I tend to, unless it's a long project, I tend to pull out my notes app on my phone and write on that. I especially like that in terms of writing, or if it's on the computer, whatever. I like having it on an electronic base because it allows me to erase and restart and completely shift things without having to start a new piece of paper or cross things out and it's completely a mess looking on the paper or whatever. So that's in terms of like practical supports, things that I use for creativity. In terms of what's encouraged me for creativity, encouragement from my friends to keep writing, to keep being myself, loved ones as well, to keep doing things that are kind of in that realm of relaxing. And though usually my creativity isn't very relaxing unless it's usually it's processing big topics. But anyway, encouragement from friends, encouragement from my therapist in terms of writing. She's really encouraged me to keep on processing heavy topics and things that I'm going through and things that I'm working towards. She's encouraged me to continue processing that through writing. So that's been really encouraging. In terms of like inspiration, I wasn't sure if you meant like supporting me in terms of like what gives me the juice or whatever to create. Therapy is a huge one. I get a lot of things to process in therapy. So writing based on that or whatever's happening maybe in relationships, be that friendship or romantic, though honestly, I think creativity is used too much in the realm of romance. I think not used too much, it's just we focus too much on it, I think. So, but anyway, I do dabble in that, the romantic that I am. Yeah, those kind of things. And it could be the stage of life I'm in, or really anything that's giving fodder to the fire of what's going on in my life might be a thing I might use for inspiration.
Mm. So, there's the piece of support from people. So, almost like
Mhm,
the emotional support and encouragement to keep doing it. Because writing is
mhm.
hard. It's not the easiest thing to engage in. Um,
Especially short stories, it turns out.
I remember I wrote a short story once and it was really great. And then I was like, this is very seven. I'm like, I can't be bothered finishing this. I don't know how to bring this home. And so I
Yeah,
wrote the worst ending and I got so much criticism, but
yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't finish
That's
it.
that's the place that I was having difficulty too. It was like I was at first when I first started the short story, I was like in it. I was like, oh, my best friend's gonna love this. It's gonna make her happy, blah, blah, blah. And I made a mistake as well of showing her the progress I had made, which made her happy. And then I was like, oh, kind of done, whatever. But then I was like, no, I want to finish this. I want this to be a gift. I want to complete it. But figuring out how to bring it to an end, it just felt like it was never going to end. And it felt like I was trapped in it. Let me tell you, I've never been so proud of myself as when I finished that short story.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Especially an emotional short story can be really tricky. And I love how you talked about therapy as a place for inspiration because a lot of your creative hobbies are to do with emotional processing. And so you
Mm,
can there's so many different places we can get fodder for that emotional processing because it's sort of everywhere. And I probably should do more of that. I should take more inspiration of things I should be emotionally processing.
mm.
So I think that's an important thing to reference as well.
And I do find it easier as a head type. Going through this, honestly, going through thinking about this interview has helped me, has shown me how much I use my head use the head center in my creativity. And I mean, just as encouragement to you, like I really do feel like when you're writing and processing the emotions in that way, it's much more accessible. Though of course I do still need to work on actually feeling my feelings.
Overrated. I found that's why I liked painting, especially initially I would paint with my fingers because it's a great way for the emotions to bypass the head and
Mm,
come out. And so every time I would do this painting, an emotion would come up. And because I was in motion, it always helps when I was in motion, I was like, "Oh, here's this feeling. Oh, let's paint this feeling. What color is this feeling? What
mm,
shape is it?" And it was just sort of
mm,
physically doing it on the canvas in front of me, and I found that so helpful and it's such a safe space to start doing that. I think poetry would have been just too overwhelming at that time for me, but
mm.
the painting piece
Yeah.
was a safe way to start building that skill set because emotional processing is a skill set. It's not
Mm. Oh yeah, for
something we
sure.
know how to do just off the bat, you know?
Yeah. No, agreed. Yeah, learning to identify your emotions, learning to feel them, all of that stuff. It is a task. It is a task.
It is a task. It's such a task.
Yeah.
So, what's it like for you to experience creative blocks and how do you navigate those?
Yeah, personally, I don't really feel like I have a lot of experience with creative blocks just because creativity isn't usually a goal for me. It's usually like a tool I'm using for whatever end I'm wanting, like processing the thing or
Mm.
giving myself advice or whatever. It's not because that's not a goal, I don't have a block. The closest thing to that would be the short story that I did write for my best friend. And what I did there, I actually elicited the help of my sexual four brother, who is working on writing novels and stuff like that. And I was like, how do I bring this to an end? And he helped me think through what I needed to do and that it didn't all need to be completely fleshed out. It was enough to give like hints of something, go in a direction of something or whatever. But yeah, in terms of emotional blocks, I don't feel like I identify with that a lot just because it's not something that I'm working towards. And then if I do have a thing I've started writing or pictures I've started taking or whatever, I feel perfectly fine to abandon it if it's not serving me. So I might spend hours on something and be like, erase it, whatever. I processed a little through it, but it wasn't something I wanted to complete. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting because that's definitely not how I experience. I love the
Mm.
fact that there's no goal, so therefore if I don't want to finish it, I just don't finish it and that's completely fine.
You
Oh,
just need to
okay.
learn more from me.
Yeah,
That's what this interview has shown.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, clearly. I think us head types need to learn a lot from each other when it comes to the
Right.
emotional realm and
Oh
how to
yeah.
navigate it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I have a lot to learn.
Oh. So you've known that you're a social six for about a year now. Has that shaped or changed how you approach creativity?
I don't think it's affected how I approach creativity. It's definitely given me more insight and things to process. Like I didn't realize how much my life was affected by and ruled by fear. And so I now have things where I've written a little bit about fear or whatever. But the Enneagram as a whole has helped me there. Even when I thought I was a one, I thought I was a self-pres one, it helped me to begin to realize how self-critical I was and how much I measure my worth or my, now I know more safety or things like that, but how much I measure how I can be well in the world by how much I have or have not living up to my standards or my ideologies or whatever. And so the Enneagram helping me see that I had myself so, I was self-policing myself so much. That gave me a lot to process in terms of writing. And then going through this process, thinking about the questions you've asked and things like that, that's helped me see, like I said, just how much I use the head center in terms of my creativity. I think even in terms of my jokes, the jokes I tell, they're very sixy, I feel. I think my primary method with which I joke, and I will say, sometimes I feel like it's a less percentage, but maybe it's like 50% of the time only I find it funny, and 50% of the time other people do, but feels like less sometimes. But anyway, basically what I do is I think of something, I see a situation or something, and I think of a possibility that kind of makes sense, but is also pretty nonsensical. And then I say it as if I fully believe it. And then people either think I'm serious and think I'm stupid, or they've spent enough time with me that they know that's my joke and they give me a little pity giggle or a full on, maybe a full on laugh. But I find myself hilarious in that no matter what. I really enjoy my sense of humor, but it's very sixy to me, just in that it's like, see a situation, think of a possibility, say, yeah. Anyway, but
It's interesting you brought up sense of humor in here, and I think that's important because I haven't as yet spoke to a comedian. I'm like, oh, maybe I should try and speak to a
oh,
comedian
nice,
about this
yeah,
because the way we tell jokes often comes very strongly from our personality and the way we see the
mm,
world. And because I think, yeah, a lot of the times my sense of humor isn't well received either because
yeah,
it's a bit offbeat and a bit off kilter and not
yeah,
necessarily socially acceptable. And I've made a connection that isn't obvious to people.
hmm,
And because it's not obvious, they don't necessarily get the joke or make the connection. It's almost
yeah,
like
yeah,
you're like, oh, okay, I need to tell you how I got to that step so you find that funny. But
yes,
by then, you can't explain a
yes.
joke because jokes you have to explain are inherently unfunny.
I relate to a lot, and it's interesting how you said, I don't know, I feel like this might be kind of interesting in terms of the 6 and a 7. You said
Mm,
you make the joke based on some type of connection, whereas I think I make the joke based on some type of possibility. But in both
mm.
cases, we're using our heads and we're making the joke, but it's kind of got that twist on it.
So I'm
Mm,
I'm curious because as a social six, I can imagine that there would be like a set of rules or an ideology around creativity, and I haven't heard that as strongly so far. So I'm curious, is that an area where you just don't have a set of rules, or the set of rules are something that create flexibility and don't necessarily invite the inner critic in as much?
Interesting. One thing I did have written in my notes that I'm trying not to look at is that when I'm writing, there are 3 things that are important to me. And maybe this kind of fits into a kind of rule or whatever. I didn't think about it in that way, but now that you mention it, it has to feel authentic to me. Like it has to feel authentic to my internal experience, which could be feelings. And it could even be something that I'm working towards. Like, for example, if I'm writing a poem about my depression and I'm writing about something that I I want to think or whatever, that's still okay for authentic for me because it's something I'm aiming towards, you know. But in any case, it has to be authentic to me. Has to feel complete. Once I get to the end, it has to feel like I've said what I wanted to say, or I've processed what I wanted to process, or whatever. It has to feel complete. And then it has to feel aesthetically pleasing to me. It doesn't have to be aesthetically pleasing to other people, but it's got to be aesthetically pleasing to me, at least passable in terms of my self-criticality. But I don't know if I could, maybe you could think of those things as in terms of kind of rules overarching my creativity. But honestly, I just haven't thought about creativity a lot, period. And until this interview, I hadn't thought about a lot about creativity, period. I hadn't thought a lot about creativity in relation to myself. I hadn't thought a lot about creativity in relation to my subtype. And so maybe that's something that if I gave more thought, I would come to some type of overarching rules or ideology or whatever. But I don't feel that right now.
Mm. And it was actually quite hard for me to find sixes to interview
Mm.
because I think there is a sense for sixes that creativity can be seen as risky and something they may not participate in.
And interviewing can
Yeah,
be risky.
that's right. I know there was a lot of fear about sitting down with me, and I really appreciate you taking that leap. And so I'm curious, what helped you push through that fear to be here today?
Mm. Well, first of all, I didn't realize how scared I was until about 15 minutes before the interview.
Uh-huh.
I was very much I've I've spent over a week, and not that I spent every moment on this or whatever, but I've written it down all on a Google Doc, and then I first called the document abbreviated creativity notes, but it ended up not being abbreviated, just more organized. So then I rewrote it organized in that way. And then I rewrote it in my 8 pages of notes here in an abbreviated way that I could maybe look down kind of ambiguously and not look
Yeah,
like I'm looking.
the
But
subtle glance.
right,
Yeah.
right. I put it on top of a trash can actually that's perfectly level to my waist. But anyway, like I've been so thinking about it and just wanting to make sure that it made sense to me and that it was faithful to what I actually believe about creativity and my relationship with it, as well as yeah, I don't even remember what the question I'm answering now, but basically I've been very much in my head about it, very much just thinking about it and writing about it and blah, 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 blah. And then these last 15 minutes, I'm doing this interview in my best friend's house. My two closest friends are two nines. And my best friend was just telling me, like, you can tell Samantha that if it's really bad, that you don't want it to be posted, and you can, and this is a learning experience, all this kind of stuff. And just, I think in these moments leading up to it where I was more nervous than I've ever been for prepping for any interview period, just realizing that this will be a learning experience and that it's not a, if it's, like I said, horrible, I can be like, please don't post it or edit the crap out of it or whatever. But, and then, yeah, I really love the Enneagram so much. It means so much to me in my life in terms of things that I've been working on and things that it's helped me see about myself and how it's helped me be more emotionally healthy and be more emotionally well, and how much it's helped me in my relationships, and just the list goes on in terms of how much the Enneagram has meant to me. So it was really a really exciting idea for me to be able to like talk to you, who's an Enneagram expert, about like my favorite thing. And just, I don't know, kind of like you were saying with contribution with in terms of creativity period, like be able to contribute to the space, but also try not to allow myself be freaked out about the fact that I'm trying to contribute to the space.
Mm.
Yeah.
I appreciate all of that and you being here. And I wondered as you were talking, is if I know all those notes was partly preparation to try and take the fear away, but I also wondered as a social six, if part of it was trying to capture your ideology or the set of rules that you follow so you could
Mm,
speak as an expert of the
mm.
ideology as opposed to as just what Alex thinks and feels about creativity.
Interesting. I That was a thought that crossed my mind. I questioned myself and I was like, oh man, am I representing like all social sixes right now? And then like when I had that thought, it was like, no, Alex, bring it back. This is just, and I
Mhm.
actually thought about when we started I was like, maybe when I start the interview, I can say to her, or I can say to the camera, I can be like, this is just my perspective as a social six, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, no, Alex, that's like, you're trying to over explain yourself. You're like going into those patterns that I go into. But yeah, my brain is blinked again on what question I'm answering. But it hasn't felt like I don't feel like I'm carrying the weight of all social sixes, but I do very much plan to look at what the other sixes have had to say in this interview. But I try not to look at too many interviews because I was like, and I try not to talk to my friends very much because I was like, this needs to remain faithful to what I think. I cannot have the input of other people. I can't be biased by what other people have said in their interviews, whatever. Yeah, anyway, that was a little blabby, but there you go.
And I think that's a great point. Like you wanted to prepare, but you tried to hold yourself back from over preparing, knowing that it would cloud your voice. Like you wanted to be as authentic as possible in terms of what you
Yes.
think creativity is, and knowing that if you had asked too many people or
Mhm.
gone out and tried to, form a complete set of what's right or what's appropriate, it
Yeah.
would have been much harder for you to speak from what's authentic to you.
Right. Even when I was talking to my brother about this interview, I was like, don't give me, as I go through what I've said, don't tell me what you think. You can tell me how you would have interpreted the question just because it's interesting. It was so interesting hearing how the way he heard your questions was so different from the way I heard your questions.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons why I was so nervous was because it was like, I've thought all this through. I feel like I've come to conclusions as to what I think, but there's no way I'm going to be able to remember that. And
Mm.
so I'm going to, as I'm doing this interview, I'm going to be constantly in my head of like, oh, I forgot to say that part. Oh, I forgot to say that part. Oh, I said that part wrong. And like it won't live up to the accuracy I tried to write down.
Mm. I I
Mm.
I I
Yeah.
totally get
Yeah.
it. So my last question is, what creation are you proudest of, personal or professional, or both?
Yeah, nothing professionally. In terms of personal, I was stuck between the two. It was either the short story, which emotionally I'm most proud of because it was just so hard. It was so my I started it in like November. It was supposed to be a Christmas present for December. Didn't make it December. Then I was like, okay. Eventually, I was like, okay, her birthday's April 12th. It'll be an April 12th present. And it was only by having that deadline and by being like, okay, I have to stop editing it. I have to stop. Whatever. It was so hard. to do those 8 pages. So very hard. So that's the one I'm most emotional connection wise, I'm most proud of. In terms of just connection, in terms of what I'm passionate about in life and stuff like that, it would definitely be my website, which is basically just about its writings. It's just genuine writings that I've written through the years, processing, thinking through things, struggling with depression, struggling with suicidality, all that kind of stuff. And so that's very important to me, just because I really, really hope that my website can help people who are struggling, or help people who want to be there for people who are struggling. And so, yeah, I have those two connection wise.
Yeah, I got to take a look at your website yesterday when you sent over the link, and it was great. I really appreciated reading some of the posts and the way you'd written it. So yeah, I hope people find it and are able to appreciate it and be useful for them too. So
Yeah, I hope it helps people.
mm. All right. Well, this has been great. This has
Oh, I
been
did it.
very fun. We've made
Oh
it to
gosh.
the end.
Yes.
Breathe out now.
Yeah. Yeah. Give myself a little treat, maybe a little cinnamon bagel or something.
Oh, it sounds perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. Bye.